Hey guys, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be telling you about an awesome application that I've been using for a couple of years now to look after and safeguard all of my passwords. That's right, it's a self-hosted password manager called Vaultwarden, and the beauty of this is that it runs using the underlying Bitwarden, which you might have heard of. And this setup is pretty similar to how we set up Headscale in the last video, whereby Headscale is simply an open implementation of Tailscale. The same thing applies here. Vaultwarden is an open source server that you can host locally and have all the benefits of Bitwarden. So what problem are we trying to solve here? Well, over the past few years, there have been a number of high profile breaches of online password managers. And this doesn't give you much confidence over the security of your passwords. Plus, it means that each time this happens, you're going to go and have to change all of your passwords on all of your sites. And that's a real pain. Now, the use of an online password manager is often a trade-off in terms of convenience. You want somebody else to look after your passwords, and your hope is that it's more secure and more reliable than doing it yourself. And that's probably true. Things like Google and LastPass, etc., they're going to have a more robust infrastructure and backup system, you'd hope, than your home lab. But don't let that put you off, because the way that we can configure Vaultwarden, we can make sure that we have some availability, backup, redundancy, and a number of fail-safes just in case everything goes wrong. And I'll talk about those in a moment. So quite simply, Vaultwarden is an open source implementation of the Bitwarden API. So that means you get pretty much all of the features of Bitwarden self-hosted. And on top of that, you can use all of the official Bitwarden applications across all of your devices to give you a really slick interface into your password manager. So that means there are Android clients, iOS clients, Windows desktop, Linux images, integrations into Chrome and other browsers, and it gives you things like biometric sign-in, notes encryptions, credit card syncs, one-time passwords, password generators, and a whole host of other features. And it does all of this whilst being self-hosted, so you don't have to worry about some company getting breached, having all of your passwords, and then possibly getting your accounts hacked or your money stolen, etc. And now, because you are self-hosting this, you might be concerned about availability. I want to use this on my phone whilst I'm out and about, but I don't want to expose this to the internet. Well, thanks to the Bitwarden app, your passwords are synced and stored onto your mobile device, so you can use them remotely. And as I've shown in my last few videos, we can set up a VPN so that we don't have to expose Vaultwarden to the internet. We can simply remote back into our network and access Vaultwarden as if it was exposed to the internet, but securely through a VPN. That will allow us to sync, add new passwords, and all of the other things that you might want to do with a password manager. And if you're concerned about the backups, I've shown you a 3-2-1 backup strategy before, and that same principle applies here. Because we're going to deploy this as a Docker container, we can have Restic backing up our container data to a NAS or another share that you have on your network, and then we can use something like rclone or any other tool to back this up to the cloud. If that's too much for you, there is a simple integration where you can simply just download your passwords either encrypted or in a text-based file, and for those who aren't too tech literate, you could even open those up and do a Control F and find your password in case everything went wrong. So let's dive into the configuration files and have a quick look through. Thankfully, this is really simple and I'll have you up and running in just a few minutes. I said this was going to be pretty straightforward, and it is. This should look very familiar to any of the videos that you've seen me produce already. So just having a quick look through here, we've specified the Vaultwarden name. We said we want the latest image. Now that makes sense. We want the latest updates and security fixes. This is going to be looking after all of our passwords after all. Next, we're going to specify a volume mount, and this is quite simple. There's just a single directory that we need to specify so that Vaultwarden can keep all of its data there. This can then be picked up by Restic and backed up as usual. The final section is the traffic proxy. Now, Vaultwarden requires an HTTPS certificate because it uses the crypto API function within the browser, and that requires HTTPS. Now, you might be concerned because you don't want to expose this to the internet, and that's a valid point. But if you watched my traffic video, we set up a DNS challenge where we didn't actually have to do any port forwarding to enable us to use valid SSL certificates provided by Let's Encrypt. And you could use that exact same setup here to make sure that you have valid certs without exposing this to the internet. Now, I don't want to go into this too much, and I'll do a video on this later, but if you are using this same traffic instance to host external services and you want to restrict some services like Vaultwarden only to internal, you might want to consider either using another entry point for this container, one that isn't accessible externally, or setting up a separate instance of traffic itself. We'll come onto that in another video. So looking through the traffic, there's nothing here that you won't be familiar with if you followed my videos. We're simply specifying the subdomain we're going to use, and we're forcing a redirect to HTTPS. We're then putting it on the proxy network, which is where our traffic installation resides. So let's go ahead now and spin that up and see what happens. So I've copied the config file on my GitHub page, and I've tweaked this for my configuration. You simply need to add your subdomain to this config, and if you've been following my previous videos, this should all work nicely. So let's go ahead and deploy this container and check the logs and then access the web GUI to sort out all of the configuration. So navigate to the folder where you have your compose file stored and simply sudo docker compose up-d. This shouldn't take very long as it's a small image. Now once it's deployed, you're going to want to go and check this. I'm using Portainer for this, but you can check the logs using docker logs. So in Portainer, we can see that it's still starting, and that's probably because it hasn't quite gone through the health check yet. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong. Let's check the logs just to make sure. So in here, we can see that it's created its own keys and that it's listening to all interfaces on port 80. Now, I said that it is HTTPS, but we're running this through traffic, and that's handling all of our SSL termination. So once you've added that subdomain into your DNS, I'm using Pi-hole, so that's where I've added my record. You should be able to navigate to this and access the configuration wizard. Let's try that now. So hopefully, if you've done that correctly, your reverse proxy set up, you don't have to use traffic, you can use whatever you want. But as long as you've got a valid SSL certificate, you should be able to reach the web configuration wizard. If it's not working for you and you're trying with traffic, check out my traffic document, check out my GitHub, just to make sure that your config's right. So to begin using Vaultwarden, don't be confused into putting an email address in and clicking continue. That's only useful if you've already created your account. We need to hit the little blue link that says create an account. So once you've clicked that, you need to put in an email address, a name, and your master password. Now, the email address, it doesn't matter if it's a valid email. This is just your login name. I would recommend that you do use a valid email because it's easier to use, and there might be some functionality where you can send things to your email address. So go ahead and fill in the email and your name. And next, the important part is your master password. Now, the irony here is that we need to create a really secure password, i.e. complex, hard to hack, but it cannot be stored within the password manager itself. Now, this is pretty much true for all password managers. You've kind of got the weak link where if you get the master password, you've got access to everything. So think of something that's complex but easy to remember. Now, things like a passphrase are going to be helpful in this scenario, and I'll drop a link in the description below to some material on how to generate a good passphrase. I know the purists here on the bleeding edge are going to be arguing for a passwordless society, but we're not there yet. So go ahead, put in your passphrase twice, and you might want to supply a password hint here. So don't do what I've done and just put in a silly password. Make sure that this is a strong password and drop a hint in case you forget. Once you're done with that, you want to create your account. The good news is it's also going to scan against its known list of breached passwords. So if you're using one that's been compromised, you shouldn't if you're following the guidance that I've linked, it will notify you. So let's go ahead and create our account. Now that's quite good because I put in a weak password. It's actually come up and told me that. If you get that same message, I recommend you go and change it. But for this, I'm just going to ignore it. Now this is quite funny, because I've created a new username and password for a service, my existing Vaultwarden has actually popped up in my browser and said, do you want to save this password? Now that's great because it's familiar functionality. We have the same thing in our browser asking whether we want to remember our password. So from a habituation point of view, this should be really easy to use and adapt into your existing workflow. So let's go ahead and log in with the email and the master password that we just created. And once we're inside, we're greeted with the Vaultwarden UI, which is really nice and friendly. This is basically the exact same UI you will get on the Android and the iOS app. It's just in a desktop format. So as this is a fresh installation, there's nothing in my Vault. So let's just go and create something as a demo. We simply need to hit New Item. When you're greeted with this wizard, it's asking you, what type of item is this? And this is one of the beautiful things about Vaultwarden and Bitwarden is there are so many options here that you can use. So this could be a default login item, and this is things like typically a website, or it could be an Android app. The important thing is as well, when you're using this on a mobile device, the browser pop-up that I got here that you can see, that will also pop up on your mobile device. So when you're logging into your applications, you can use this not only for websites, but also applications on your mobile device. I'll show that in a minute when I give you a phone demonstration. But for now, you can either do this manually through the web GUI, or you can do this through your phone, or you can do it in real time with your applications. Now one thing that's really cool is you can use the auto password generator. So you can just click these arrows here and it's going to create a complex password for you. You can actually tweak this to make it longer. All of my passwords are at least 40 or whatever the maximum is that can be supported by the application or website that you're using. Now doing it this way is fine, but I've never actually created an account through the web UI. I've always used my mobile phone or the handy built-in browser plugin with Chrome. So let's go and have a look at that now. Now it can get a bit confusing because I keep saying Vaultwarden, but remember, Vaultwarden is the open source self-hosted version that we're running. This is still using the Bitwarden applications and browser extensions. So simply search for the Bitwarden Chrome extension and click Add to Chrome. Once you've installed the browser extension, just pin it to the top right corner of Chrome, click on it. Now don't fill in your email address and click next, because you can see underneath the email address it says the region you want to connect to. Now we're not using Bitwarden, we're using Vaultwarden. It just happens to use the Bitwarden API and is compatible. Now thankfully you can click the drop down bar and click self-hosted. Now you're presented with the following screen, and it's pretty straightforward. You simply need to specify the subdomain that you specified in the traffic labels in your Docker Compose. So go ahead and fill the server URL in and then hit save in the top right corner. You'll get a little green bar at the bottom which confirms that you've saved that. So now you're ready to go and use your email and password that we just did in the account creation. So put your email in, hit next, put your password in, and then log in with that master password. If all goes well, we should be logged in and we should be presented with a blank vault. Or if you created something in the web GUI, it should sync and you should see it here. I actually find this is much easier to use than the web UI. And things like the generator, for example, you can simply click on the generator. You have full control over how long and complex you want to make this. You can tell it which types of character you want to use, and also this looks and behaves exactly the same as the mobile app, or at least it does on Android, and I assume that's the same for iOS. Now that you're signed in, and maybe you've added some, if you haven't added any passwords, you can actually import. So if you're using something like Google to manage your passwords at the moment, you can download all your passwords and import them into Vaultwarden and they'll show up here. It's a really handy tool. But importantly, now that we're actually logged in, every time we go to a website and sign in, it's going to ask us if we want to remember that password, or if you're creating an account for the first time, it should again ask if you want to store that password. So let me test that out with my Pi-hole installation. Let's navigate to Pi-hole. Because I've never logged in with it using this installation of Vaultwarden, when I put my password in, it should ask me if I want to save it. So let me put my password in and hit continue, and let's see if we get the pop-up. So hitting login, I get the password pop-up at the top. Do you want to save this? So let's hit save. So now you'll see that there's a number 1 on this shield here. Now that means that when I've navigated to a website, it has a password associated with this. Now, that might have more than one if you've got more than one password, more than one account for a website, but you simply just need to choose your account that you want to log in with. Now, this is excellent, and we could go back to our Vaultwarden website now, and we'd see this created within it. Also, if you've got the mobile app, and I'll get onto that in a minute, it should automatically sync, and that will be pulled. If it doesn't, or like I say, if you're away from home and you don't have this externally exposed, which I don't recommend you do expose, you could VPN in and you could just scroll down and it automatically refreshes. There is a manual refresh as well if you want to do that, and that's available within the settings. You can hit settings and you can hit sync and you can tell it to sync now. So let's test that this works. Let me log out of Pi-hole. And then let's try logging in using the stored credentials within Vaultwarden. So click the shield, click the item. You'll see that it populated the password field for me. Then let's hit login. And voila, there you go. You now have Vaultwarden working. It's able to store passwords. It's able to save and automatically populate the password field for you. It's a really awesome tool. So let's hop over to Android and I'll show you that I've been telling the truth, that this really is a seamless integration. It looks and behaves exactly like you would expect for a password manager, and this Pi-hole password that we just created should be available to view in there. So heading over onto my mobile, I've gone to the Google Play Store and I've downloaded the Bitwarden application. Do the same for iOS. The UI, the experience should be exactly the same. Once you're on the main screen of Bitwarden, you want to make sure again, just like we did in the app, that the region is specified as self-hosted. Let's put in our email address now and then continue. Let's proceed to put in our password. And then once you're logged in, you should be able to see all of your saved passwords. So I've logged into my real one just so you can have an idea of what it looks like when you've actually been using this for a while. So in here I can see that I've got 751 login credentials, I've got 3 credit cards stored, 1 identity stored, 1 secure note stored. I can see that I've got 58 items in the bin. I've got also at the top 5 verification codes stored. And if I go to the generator, you can see that I've got the friendly generator that we just saw. Interestingly, on the mobile device, you can hit the settings and you can put on things like biometrics, PIN numbers, login requests, 2-step login, all of those things. So it really is a good, secure, self-hosted alternative. So I hope this video has given you all the tools that you need to go ahead and replace your third-party hosted password manager with something that you have on your infrastructure and is completely controlled by you. There's no risk now of an attack on a third-party hosting provider, meaning that your passwords are in the wild. You don't have all the inconvenience of having to go and set up all your passwords again, and you've got something that is comparable from a functionality standpoint. You have a mobile device with biometrics that has all of your details. You have a Chrome extension that behaves and acts just like any other password manager. And if you followed my other videos, we're able to back this up securely to give you peace of mind. So that's a wrap for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.